All right. Welcome, Chris, to Automate All the Things live chat number two. This is 5 months from the first one, but really, really excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Very excited to be here.
For those who are maybe not as deep into the Webflow ecosystem, you are the founder of Jetboost, Jetboost.io. So
Mhm.
maybe we'll start with a quick introduction into Jetboost and your role within the Webflow ecosystem.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great. With Jetboost.io, I am building add-ons and kind of like power-ups for Webflow. Webflow, it's an incredible tool. It's an amazing tool for building web pages. Um, and there are certain little features and add-ons that people have requested that aren't natively available in the Webflow platform. And so JetBoost has been providing solutions for that. And the big ones right now are kind of like a search and filtering system for your Webflow content.
Mhm. So, for those who aren't, we're not going to go into a demo of JetBoost, but essentially allows you, from my understanding, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, is allow you to do more dynamic and more granular filtering than is allowed in Webflow today. Is that correct at a high level?
Yeah, and it's all done without, JetBoost is a no-code tool. You don't have to have any knowledge of JavaScript or add like, there are ways to do it in Webflow via custom code, but you don't have to know how to do any of that. You just add it to your site and it runs and works for you.
Awesome. So I think our timing for this interview couldn't be better. You just announced an investment from Earnest Capital. My angle is more around, and what I'm interested in is um, why do you think why did you want to take that investment, and how do you see JetBoost growing, and what do you want it to grow into from today, taking that money and that investment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. JetBoost has always been bootstrapped, self-funded. It's never, taking investment has never crossed my mind. Uh, but with Earnest Capital, their goals and my goals are extremely aligned. They specialize in funding, more of the kind of bootstrap type companies. They're not looking for some sort of crazy exit at the end of it. They're just investing in profitable businesses that they think they can help grow. And I sort of, in talking with Tyler over at Earnest, I agreed with his vision of how JetBoost could benefit from taking some funding from Earnest, and they've just got a great network of other founders and mentors, and so that was really the main driver for me behind that investment. And ultimately, it allows me the freedom to you know build JetBoost in a it's still going to be mostly me for the meantime, but it gives me options to bring on possibly some support people or um, some people help with design or marketing, the areas where I'm not as strong at, and I can focus on building out even better solutions for the Webflow community.
So, I've noticed personally, and maybe others have as well, this transition of JetBoost from create dynamic search, a very narrow focus on a specific gap in the Webflow feature set, to JetBoost as potentially a add-on or additional add-ons to Webflow more generally. So is that a kind of consequence of this ability to take a little bit more risk or to think of your business differently, or is that just an evolution of how you've thought of JetBoost? Is because you've identified other gaps that you potentially want to go after, or is this intimately related to that funding?
Yeah, I would say it's been separate from the funding. It has just been an evolution of, JetBoost started out because I had a friend that built a site in Webflow, and he had this very specific problem of not being able to search. He had built a job board, and there was no way to search the actual jobs on like the job board
Mm-hmm.
listing. Um, and so that was really how JetBoost started, is this very narrow problem that I built this solution for. And I think that has given me exposure to the other problems that people face when they're working with Webflow, and things that they wish they were able to do that they can't do so easily.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's really just been a natural evolution of how can I expand JetBoost to help more people, to solve more problems. Uh, that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, I'm curious, and this is what I'm most excited to talk about. We've been talking about your role in this Webflow ecosystem as a gap within Webflow in what Webflow is currently able to do, what it will do. So, do you define or see yourself as something that Webflow will never do, will eventually do? How do you think of yourself relative to Webflow? That employs hundreds of developers, potentially, and seems to have not done what you do. And it's funny because I even see folks at Webflow recommending JetBoost to folks who are want that dynamic filter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how do you see that as a small player versus Webflow, the company?
Yeah, that's, obviously at some point, at least I believe Webflow is going to build, dynamic filtering and search and all of the things that JetBoost eventually, will have itself. Webflow is going to build that natively into the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Timing wise, as far as when that happens, some of these things, it could be a few years down the road. I would say two reasons. One, just the focus of, their priorities are different. A lot of it lately has been focused on like the e-commerce side of things and building out that to maybe compete with like Shopify more. And two, like JetBoost is actually in a position where I can build some of these features much quicker and more easily
Mm-hmm.
than the Webflow team itself, solely because like there's so much less for me to think about. I don't have to think about how it works in the designer and how it works for, tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of sites that they support, millions of sites. I don't even know where they're at now.
Yeah.
But they're carrying like a much bigger anchor, whereas I can kind of, just sort of attach myself to the big ship and build these little things that help people out.
Right. A lot of questions flow from that. So, clearly it's interesting because I've spoken to a few other add-ons and they have this argument of whatever Webflow will build or whoever will build, ours will be better. And it sounds like you're not actually saying that. You're saying eventually they'll be able to do this natively, maybe a little differently, but that you eventually foresee Webflow taking this on.
Yeah. I would say it would be better if it was built natively into Webflow. There's no doubt about that. But I think one, I can probably stay ahead of the curve for a little while as far as
Mm-hmm.
identifying other gaps, other things that they're not working on, and build those out. And two, I mean, Webflow, their executive team has said eventually they do want to build out a plugin platform. Um,
Right.
I actually heard Vlad, their CEO, say on the MakerPad podcast that, you know, maybe dynamic filtering is something that gets solved via their plugin platform, and maybe they never build it natively. So
Right.
um, yeah, I think the long term, at least my long term idea for JetBoost is when this plugin API becomes available, like then I move everything on JetBoost over to that, and then I'll officially be integrated into Webflow into their ecosystem.
So that's really interesting. I do want to talk to that trade-off of kind of rogue. Essentially, right now you're a rogue plugin, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and that transition to official. But before we talk about that in a formal way, like before I ask you that question in a formal way, I'm wondering from your perspective, how have you thought of uh, breaking changes from Webflow's perspective, right? So, you know, is there something that guarantees that Webflow won't break your integration in the way you've built it or thought of it. Because some company could come in and say, hey, this is rogue, we're going to shut this down. It could be the way you've come about that. I'm just curious of your thinking when you said, hey, we're going to build a business around this specific gap. What stopped? Was there any thought around breaking changes or things that will stop you from existing potentially?
Yeah, I think really the only way the Jetboost integration could be broken is if if Webflow made a breaking change to their API, to their CMS API, which I don't foresee happening.
Right. Okay, so
Because
this is not a kind of, it's not as much as you're built on top in a rogue way. It's more that you're leveraging existing functionality that will be stable throughout time.
yeah, I think kind of I guess what I would call the rogue aspect of Jetboost is, Webflow has this CMS API. It's fairly limited in what it allows you to do. So I'm really working within a lot of the limitations of what they make available and doing my best to come up with creative solutions that get around some of those limitations and help people, add these things to their sites as frictionless as possible.
So I want to come back to what you talked about before in terms of Webflow ecosystem. So you're right that Webflow could look at a lot of its partners, right? I think of Jetboost, but I also think of MemberStack. Think of a lot of what FinSuite did with their library, although that's not paid, but are add-ons to Webflow. So what do you hope as part of that ecosystem that Webflow does? What is kind of your wish? And I guess what is the opposite? What is your nightmare in terms of how Webflow develops its platform or ecosystem?
I think my wish is that Webflow and Jetboost work together on it, because I mean, there are very few companies building on top of the Webflow API publicly right now. Most other integrations like MemberStack and some of the other ones, they don't use the Webflow API at all. They just run JavaScript on front of the page. So I think I have pretty deep insights into what as a plugin builder, what I need from Webflow, what would make me able to build more powerful plugins and what would make my job easier. So I would hope to, work with them as far as developing that out, or at least have some sort of input or consultation with that. And maybe they have their own vision of what it should look like. But yeah, I think any sort of like early access, beta access that they granted to Jetboost, which I hope by the time they build their plugin API will be, a fairly household name for Webflow users. That's sort of the dream for me. I think probably the nightmare would just, if they one day release the plugin API and I was like totally blindsided, right. There would be a lot of work for me to then go and actually officially integrate.
I wonder, for that safety and approval because right now you're operating outside of Webflow, quote unquote, officially, but you are part of that nascent ecosystem. How much would you be willing or what would you be willing to give away to Webflow to officially be part of it, right? Whether that's integrate with their API. What I'm curious about more directly is a lot of these companies are building developer kind of platforms, whether that's Webflow or any other kind of nascent platform. And there's a certain amount of give and take between Webflow and yourself, you building on top of Webflow. So what would be your kind of thought process of, this I'm willing to give away, whether it's revenue or control. And what does that seal of approval from Webflow give you, and what could it look like?
Yeah, I think I'm willing to give away, both revenue and control if it results in a better experience for Webflow customers.
Mm,
So kind of like the two things that come to mind is one, right now, like Jetboost has its own, application that you go to jetboost.io to get all set up, and you go through our entire onboarding process, and it kind of walks you through, okay, here's what you need to go do in Webflow in order to get this working. Ideally, that's all custom UI that we've built, custom workflow. Ideally, that goes away, and Webflow says, here's how you get your plugin into our designer, using our building blocks.
mm-hmm.
I'm totally okay with that because it allows someone to stay within the Webflow tool and add these plugins to their sites. So that's like from the control side. And then from the revenue side, most of these developer platform models, the platform takes some
Mm-hmm.
percentage, and to me that's fair. It's their audience, it's their customer base, and they help market your product. So yeah, to me that seems fair.
Yeah, it's funny because I think, I don't know, I've spoken to other folks who build on top of other platforms, and um, they're not willing to concede that they are, uh, um, a small business, have no intention of being 200, 300 employees, and don't necessarily realize that, um, they're always going to be dwarfed by the platform they're on. Right. So you're not going to build a Webflow on Webflow. So your business is never going to be bigger than Webflow's.
Right.
And it's interesting that you are willing to dedicate to one platform, one feature set, really have that one kind of focus, and willing to concede, like most things, if it makes your customers more happy.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I think, yeah, it's, to me, I mean, that's ultimately what it is. It's trying to solve problems for people and do so in the best way possible. And I think, yeah, JetBoost, whatever it's, where it's at today, if it was officially integrated into this theoretical Webflow shop
Mm-hmm.
or platform, like who's to say, say it gives up 30% in revenue, well, it might do 100 times more revenue. So,
Right.
it's a win-win for everyone.
Um, I love that you're just like, you're willing to sacrifice 30% of revenue. You're just putting that out
That's my
there.
final offer.
Exactly. This hypothetical. That's really awesome. And yeah, really appreciate all of this insight. Um, what I would love to end on, and maybe the last chapter here, is just any suggestion for developers thinking of building on Webflow, or just more generally. You've gone from my friend who had a problem to serving hundreds of people, which I think is actually a relatively normal path. Any recommendations for people thinking of building these plugins on Webflow or otherwise?
Yeah, I think if you're a small company, just one or two people, it can be a great business model because you're not going to have the resources to uh, do like a big marketing campaign, whether that's like on search AdWords or just getting into various different places. Like you're limited as a small team with what you have, and so building on top of another platform, you immediately gain exposure. At least if you do it right, you gain exposure to a large customer base, a large base of people who are already paying money for solutions. So I think that's, I mean, I know everything that JetBoost has been able to do so far has been on the back of Webflow 100%.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And so last question for you, I guess, and this is maybe a personal curious. So that first, your friend who you built this for, how did you then acquire the next 10, 15, 100 users? to really be like, this I could do, it's a thing? How did you go from it's a thing I can build from to a friend to
Yeah.
this could be a thing?
Yeah, so it actually started out, I wrote a bunch of custom code for him and he put it on his site. And uh, I didn't really think anything of it. And over time, it was like probably over the period of 5 or 6 months, he would occasionally send me one or two people a month who were looking for the exact same thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I would, each site was different. So I had to write the code differently each time, but it was somewhat similar. And I would go and I would write the code for him. I just did it for free. It wasn't a big deal. Uh, but after probably about, 6 to 10 of these people, I was like, maybe I can figure out a way where somebody can add this to their own site without having to know how to write the code themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, so that's kind of where I had the validation, like maybe there's something here. And from there, it was just, I put up a landing page, said, this is what I'm doing for Webflow. If you're interested, like sign up for the early access. And, I had enough people sign up where it gave me the confidence to go and actually build it.
Yeah. I it's funny because personally, I get a lot of questions like, what made you build my only online thing, the Essential Guide to Airtable? And it was exactly the same. Like my friend was like, hey, you keep talking to this Airtable thing. Could you explain it to me?
Yeah.
And then 5 people explained it. And I said, I don't have time for this. Here's
Right.
a 2-hour thing that you could all watch. And then there's, oh, I'm sharing it. I'm like, oh, okay. So I was like, why don't you make money off of this? I'm like, really? People would pay?
Right.
That's weird. And people did. So I think hopefully what people will take away from this is if people keep asking you, maybe put a price on it and put a landing page and then build something out of it, even if it's small.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, Chris, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it. I love the fact that, you have that single focus and frankly, understand the boundaries in which you work in terms of Webflow potentially building what you're building, or even whatever their ecosystem looks like, knowing that you're going to have to, give and take to a certain extent. And that's really refreshing. And congratulations, I guess, on the funding, but mainly not the funding, but on the success. So I've only heard rave reviews around Jetboost, and I wish you, continued success.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And if I could add one thing, I would say a lot of the give and take from my perspective comes from working with Webflow, the tool, seeing the Webflow leadership, and with some of the people inside of Webflow who I've formed relationships with. Just a great group of people, and I'm really grateful to be able to serve their customers who are awesome. So.
Totally. Yeah. Let's see what we can do for No Code Conference, because that was a big one. So having met a lot of the folks at Webflow, they are totally great, amazing people. And I hope to meet them in person. If not, we'll all digitally connect on Twitter. Right. So thanks so much, Chris. If you want to reach out, jetboost.io, C_Spags at Twitter. Everything will be in the description. And yeah, I'll see you around, Chris. Have a great week.
Thanks so much, Aaron.